Welcome to Philly Prime. I'm Dave Schratweiser. It's been a heck of a week here in Philadelphia. A shooting outside Roxborough High School last week sent city police and parents and authorities scrambling up to Roxborough. It was after a football scrimmage on the football field. They were leaving the field, headed out to the locker room on the street when 5 gunmen exited a vehicle and opened fire. 14-year-old Nicholas Elizalde was killed. 4 other teenagers were wounded. This has been the talk of Philadelphia all week long, and there's nobody better to kind of talk about this than former deputy police commissioner for the Philadelphia Police Department and the current chief safety officer for the school district. 29 years on the police force in Philadelphia. I've known Kevin for probably 25 of those. Kevin Bethel, thanks for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Thank you.
Kev, I saw you at the news conference outside the school after the shooting took place, and I could tell you were fired up, as was everybody else. When you walked on that scene and arrived on that scene, kind of what was going through your head when you saw and heard what had just happened there?
Dave, it was really a struggle. You know, someone who was born and raised in the city and played football all of my high school years, and had been a concern because of coming out of last year where we had incidents of our schools where individuals had came up and shot our students, and so there was this hope that we would go into the new school year after COVID, things had settled down, that we wouldn't have any incidences in the schools like that. And so when I arrived and find so many of our kids had been shot, and then more importantly, Nicholas had expired. And as a father, as a person who was born and raised in the city, someone, as you know, had been in that space for a long time, I was like just frustrated, man, frustrated with the fact that it was no longer, the lines were no longer there anymore, right? You had these situations, one here, but now, this consistency of it now really just tore at me, man. And it was just so frustrating to see how a bunch of cowards would come up to school, and just spray, over 60 rounds around our school setting, and so many other kids could have been hit as well.
Yeah, you said this at the press conference along with Dr. Watlington. I know he was very upset as well. After school activities are what keeps kids out of problems and out of riding around in a car 5 at a time with weapons. It's supposed to keep them away from that. And here these kids are from 3 high schools scrimmaging on the field, leaving the scrimmage that afternoon, walking to the locker room, still carrying their football gear, which was then left spewed all over the street after these gunmen cowardly opened fire, as you said. After school activities are supposed to be part of the saving grace for kids, yet this happens. That has to be like a real dagger for you when you see that.
It is, because all of the data, and as Superintendent Wallington and even our preceding him, Dr. Height, really puts the out of school time, right? After school time, we know that's the time when our kids are most at risk. We know that's a time where we need to have as many programming as possible, and so it does create a challenge, because you tell parents to leave your kids behind at school. You tell them that this makes it safer for them. You tell them that this is how you can keep them away from that negative element, and then when that element just arrives at the school and just destroys all of that, the parents across the city sit up there and look like, the mere fact, Dave, that this child's mother was there, who was a teacher in our system, the fact that she had to ride with her child in that car, the fact that she had to see her son take his last breath. Sunday, man, I was almost in tears because I'm sitting there. I didn't know that, at the time.
I didn't either. No.
And so when I saw and read that, I had to pause. I was just so angry, that a parent would have to, go, to endure that. And I know many of our parents and mothers and fathers and family members have to deal with that, with a number of the incidents we have across the city. But this one really was what hurts you to the heart and to your core.
Yeah, and it was really moving over the weekend. They had a vigil outside the school. Several hundred people showed up and then all marched down to the scene and put flowers there and candles, things like that. You can tell that people are really shook by this. Pretty much everybody I run into is bringing this up and talking about it. It's getting a lot of comments and things like that on my social media when I talk about it and give updates on what's kind of going on here. I think the thing that's also so chilling here is that this, and I hate to say this, almost looked like a mob hit. I mean, there's 5 guys in a vehicle that was stolen, lying in wait for 6 to 8 minutes, according to what the police tell us, and you guys talked about at the news conference. And they let several football players go by from the scrimmage and then saw the individual or individuals they were looking for, got out of the vehicle in unison, and the video was chilling to see them exit that vehicle and then just open fire. And then the one kid run down the block chasing the young man who was then hit and on the ground, stood over him, tried to execute him on the ground, but he ran out of bullets. I mean, when you think about the one suspect they have identified publicly is 16, Kevin. Yeah. I mean, that has to shake you. It's shaking everybody else.
Yeah, it does. I mean, part of what we see is, and a lot of this proportional, right? We see this violence increase in our young people. We see the violence increase across the city, with our, all of our groups, and particularly our young people. But it also shows you, my argument and my conversation oftentimes, I don't get into the politics, but there's a distinction between the two, right? You have young people who are engaged in after school behavior, activities and doing the right thing.
Right.
Then you have this group of now. These are kids, young people, and my understanding, maybe some adults involved as well, who are engaging in this level of violence that has to be addressed. I mean, the scariest thing for me, Dave, was thinking that a police officer would stop that car.
Yeah.
And have 5 individuals with 5 weapons in there, and we don't know if the 6th person had a gun as well, or whoever numbers are. That's scary, right? That part to me sits and says to myself, there's this element of individuals out there who could care less about after school time, who could care less about prevention or intervention. They live in this, I tell people it's 2 worlds: the one you see, and it's the other one, the one that you've known in your work over the years, and you've seen, and they live in that space. They get power from that space. And they use these guns as the way to manifest all of that negativity and that violence that they want to exact on folks. And so it definitely shows you the difference, the disparities, and I mean, in a total difference. That there is a group of individuals in our community who have no desire to do anything positive other than to intimidate, to shoot, to kill, to do whatever they can to get to the what they feel is, whatever that is, whether it's retaliation for something that happened before, or I don't know. I don't know sometimes the root issues as to why these guys engage in this behavior.
And we don't have a motive yet. And let's say this, one of the suspects has been identified as 16 years old. Several of the victims here, including Nicholas, were 14 years old. I mean, these are kids with their entire life in front of them, playing football, trying to do better by themselves, trying to stay active, that kind of thing. The team part of this is troubling. I'll just mention, just so we have it out there, 16-year-old Dayron Bernie Thorne is the one suspect so far who's been identified by police. There's a warrant for him for murder, attempt murder, 4 counts, and a bunch of other charges. There is some information out there that he might be the driver of that car. He's still on the run. I have some advice for him. Turn yourself in. If you're the driver and you didn't do any shooting, you should tell the police who else was involved and put an end to this kind of thing. But an example has to be set here. I think listening to the district attorney, listening to the commissioner yesterday, listening to you, Dr. Watlington, John Stanford, this is something that has to have some swift and serious punishment attached to it when these guys are all brought into custody.
There's no question. I mean, sometimes this stuff is getting out of balance. The swiftness is the certainty and the severity, right? Those things kind of go, hand in hand. And I'm not saying that's, we could talk about the severity part of it, but the front end of that's why I was really, applauded the police department the other day to really come out and show the community what they were doing, show how they were taking this as a priority, see the anger and the commissioner and the team, from homicide and others really demonstrating to the community that, this was an active shooter at the school. Like sometimes I get caught in, if I turn on the news and I see CNN, and sometimes if I was at someplace else and maybe I wasn't in this very strong urban center where we have so much violence, this would have been a national story. And it would become a national story, right? But the CNN and the news, everybody would have been all over the screen, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, four kids being shot outside of the school and one getting killed, and so really, really, it deserved, and all of these incidents deserved it. But when you come to the school step and you do it at a school,
Mhm.
it really heightens the level of activity. And so I'm really appreciative of the police department looking at our kids and our school community as that place of sanctity and a place of protection, and a place where what you've crossed the line. Always cross the line, but you really have crossed the line when you kind of endanger all of our students,
Mhm.
in the manner that you did. So I'm very hopeful. But when I also look at the teens, I think it's a symptomatic of what we see when we have some level of lawlessness, and we have some level of so many guns. I know we out on the street, and we now think that we always talk about in my work around development approach and adolescent development and understanding the brain science, and most of our young people's brains are still not fully developed. Now
Mhm.
you take a teenager whose brain is not fully developed, and you give him one of the most lethal things he or she could have, mostly he, is a gun. And then we expect that somehow that it's going to resolve on its own, or they're going to have some kind of intervention is going to stop that. And so we really, really have to think about, as we allow these guns to continue. Okay, we know there's guns in our community, but if we're not going to come to a place where we need to make sure that when you do get someone with a gun, that there is some swiftness and certainty that if you have a gun, this is what's going to happen. When that feels like that is broken, and there is not fear, then then these young people say, well, listen, hey man, he's got a gun, I got a gun, you got a gun, everybody's got a gun. We look at TV, you should see some of the guns I get coming to school now. There are BB guns and airsoft guns, and they look just like the Philadelphia police officer's gun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I
so
I
that,
got to tell you, this few days after this Friday in Southwest Philadelphia, there was a car stop with 5 young men in the car, again teenagers. Lying on the floor in the back seat is an SKS assault rifle with a 30-round magazine lying on the floor. 2 young men are now charged in that case, being held on $750,000 bail. One of the teens was let go with an ankle monitor. He's, I think, 14. He might be 15. There's some other individuals in that car who, according to who I'm talking to, could be potentially related to this situation. That's still being worked on by the police department, so I don't get too far ahead of myself. But you got to give credit, you just did, to the police on how quickly they're moving here. I mean, they found the vehicle, a Ford Explorer SUV that the gunman jumped back into and sped away from the scene. They found a fingerprint in the car. They found latex gloves in the car. They found one shell casing in the car. You and I know there's all kind of technological things that police can do now with reading the kind of black box in the car to see where the car has been, who's been in the car. We can identify phones. We can do all kinds of things like that in a hurry. And this police department, you heard the commissioner say yesterday that in a few floors above her in police headquarters, multiple detectives were working on this case round the clock. You were in the police department for 29 years, Kev. When you guys get on something like this, when detectives get on something like this, it's like a junkyard dog on your leg. We're not going to let go till we get the perpetrators who are involved. Talk to me about the urgency that normally happens in the police department when a case like this happens, which touches so many lives, not just the victims and their families, but every parent who has a kid going to school.
yeah, I mean, again, as I shared, Dave, you want to treat all of these cases with a level of urgency, but clearly in this case, it even comes to a heightened level. I mean, listen, you know from your work, we have some of the best investigators in America, and probably in the world, in my opinion. I mean, these men and women have dedicated months of their lives and refined themselves to be able to really, really work and as a mechanized group to bring about, bring justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of that has been disturbed by, the hiring and all of that. But one thing I've always told, and nothing more prouder than me, you give me my homicide, I'll take my homicide detectives against anyone in America
Mm-hmm.
in the work that they do. And so I have the utmost confidence with the leadership of the police department and with the investigators involved on all levels. I mean, all the way down to the intelligence officers who are gathering information, to the officers who are in their patrol cars who kind of know those kids and seen that, and sit there and say, when I stopped that car 2 years ago, I stopped that all that stuff downstream, starting at the bottom from the beat officer in the car to the always going up to the investigators in that space. It is a collaborative effort. It's not just a one entity, but that's what you're getting, right? You're getting everybody who's focused. We need this car. You find that car. We need these individuals, and it'll be that effort both with the community support, which is always important. I mean, just
Mhm.
the way a kid walk that you don't have to have the video to see, hey, I know that walk from anywhere.
Right.
That's Dave's walk, right? And
Mhm.
I think all of that click. I think what we see here and what I see unfolding in this case and what it has to be really is when we work as a collective group, is when the community and all of the energy, even the news, right? The news putting information out and pushing this out and making it a priority. This is what real law enforcement and safety and all of these elements are when everyone is working together to bring about a result. And I think if we continue down this process, we could turn things around and moving it up to the front end as well, not just on the after the fact. That
Absolutely.
synergy has to happen at the beginning. And so, hey, I'd rather get those guys with guns versus them having this incident had at Roxborough any day of the week. But if
Yeah.
it is going to happen, then we're going to use all the resources. And I'm glad to see even our federal partners and everyone involved, and with the hope that this we will bring this case to a resolution and bring some. Well, I don't know if it'll ever be peace, but to
Yeah.
Nicholas' mom and his family and others who were injured, but at least we can start to set that as a course of action.
Yeah, and let's give some props here to the ATF, Alcohol,
Yeah.
Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They were on this scene. They've been working this with the FBI, along with the U.S. Marshals. I believe they've been doing some search warrants and things like that with the homicide unit, those kind of things. So there are a lot of partners involved here. I'm sure your officers in your schools there was 3 schools involved in that scrimmage. You're probably trying to help out, giving any
Absolutely.
kind of information they can. I wouldn't be surprised if parents called you, people called you, talked to you, that kind of thing, so they could potentially help out here. And like you said, they always say it takes a village in this situation to bring this to where it needs to be, which is at the bar in a courtroom. You need everybody to do that, and it sounds like everybody is pitching in here. Talk to me a little bit. Are you getting that kind of stuff coming through the school system that you would then pass on to the police department?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we couldn't do the work we're doing. I have men and women who do a phenomenal job every day, Dave, but they're not armed, right? My forces and unarmed, so we rely heavily on the Philadelphia Police Department to be our core partner in keeping our school and our school community safe. And so we are constantly, even not in these situations, but in all situations where we have to be able to support them and helping them to identify either other activities that are occurring across the city. We see them as a core partner. Dr. Wallington, one of the first entities he met with when he arrived here in the city of Philadelphia, was with the police commissioner and the Philadelphia Police Department to make sure they understood how important he felt the relationship was with the school district, my office, and the Philadelphia Police Department. And so my men and women listen, they're mama bears and papa bears in the schools.
Yes.
They're able to, because of their relationship, to get a lot of information. Some of them been in the system a long time and watched many of these young people grow up. And so they often can offer, information that sometimes may not be sitting readily available, but they can provide that information that can be helpful in the police department, not just solving this crime, but in other incidents that happen. Even our partnership with SEPTA Police Department has been a strong one because of the incidents that happen in their system. So we really built a strong collaborative relationship with all of our entities in the city.
You mentioned earlier the number of guns on the street, 6,000 guns taken off the street by the police department last year in 2021. A lot more this year. The district attorney, Larry Krasner, keeps talking about guns. Everybody's talking about guns. You've heard it. I've heard it. At least 10 guests on this podcast have said that kids who think they're in trouble bring a gun in case the other guy shows up with a gun. And that's why so many of these kids show up at recreation centers, playgrounds, football practices, things like this, outside them, potentially with weapons. And most of these kids are so young, Kev, they can't possibly know how to use a weapon like that. You've been through firearms training. I have at some points in my career, that kind of thing. You have to know what you're doing with that. When you fire 64 shots on an open street like that, where multiple people are around, there's a playground right near that school as well, where I understand parents and little kids were at and heard that gunfire as well. Can you kind of get into the mentality of these kids about why they feel the need to carry a gun? Do you hear that when you talk to these kids? When you see it, I know, listen, you're big on
Yeah,
juvenile justice.
right.
I know you want to reach the youth as early as you can to stop them from getting into activity like that. But what's the mindset from your years of experience?
I don't know if it's a. I mean, I don't know if it's a mindset or just availability, Dave. I
Yeah.
mean, I hear folks making this argument, and and I know you're not making an argument, but others that these kids are carrying guns because they don't feel safe and they don't. Come on, I grew up in a neighborhood during gang wars, during some of the most difficult times, in when it was not this level of homicide, but at its highest
Mhm.
level, but I know I couldn't carry a gun. It was I didn't go out with fear. I mean, I think we've created this narrative now. Yeah, we pull the policing out of their space. We don't want this. We make it very difficult. We change how we prosecute guns in the city of Philadelphia. We do some changes, or whatever that may look like, and then then we start to kind of make this justification that hey, more kids are carrying guns because they don't feel safe.
Mhm.
Well, man, I mean, they carry guns because they don't think there may be any consequences to it. We have to
Right.
name it, and I'm not
Mhm.
naming people, but we have to just be realistic. When you come to a stop sign, I mean, a light at 3 o'clock in the morning, you sit at the light at a red light. Why do you do that? Because there's a certainty or possibility that if you go to the light, the police officer is going to stop you and give you a ticket,
Right.
right? If you feel like you have something now, where guys, hey, listen, before you better not have a gun. There was a time, when you got caught with a gun, tag you at. That was the holy grail. That was a space.
Mhm.
Because not only I'm trying to present gun homicides, I'm trying to present robberies, carjackings. All of these are done with guns. So sometimes we just localize a gun as just a gun used for shootings and homicides, but guns are used to
Mhm.
terrorize, guns are used to rob, carjack. We've seen enough videos now, I mean, and it happening. And I think that young people, if we create this narrative for them, then they're going to feel it. Hey, man, listen, I need to carry a gun because he's got a gun. I think we have to kind of hit a reset button here,
Yep.
and because they also recognize, the certainty of things too, right? And there's a
Mhm.
reason why kids, we've been able to keep guns out of our school. Now we occasionally get guns in our schools, but we make a very strong stance. You are not to come to school with a gun, and we
Mhm.
have metal detectors, and we do that activity. It's not perfect, but we set that tone early in the process, and so we have to get back to the basics of saying, hey, you can't have a gun, and if you do, and then that starts to stream. We have to be going after those folks who are flooding our communities with guns, those straw purchasers, and those other things, those adults who took advantage of. Hey, listen, we talk about the time during COVID, but the street took advantage of the money in the street, right? They
Yes.
knew what to do. Like, hey, listen, they always are there, right? There's money on the street.
Mm.
Hey, if you're buying stuff, hey, we got guns over here. And so I mean, I think the system almost broke, right? Where
Yeah.
people were buying, I mean, and so I think there's this. We have to be careful, right? Because I have a gun, but I have a gun permit,
Mhm.
right? And I'm sure you do as well. I mean, I go through the process. If I get with people who are carrying a gun, whether they've been arrested before or not, they get that gun illegally, they carry that gun illegally, and what we should be trying to do is stop them from using that gun illegally.
Mm.
I don't want to be a situation where you're waiting for them to shoot somebody. That I look at that Drexel job, Dave, and it scares me.
Yeah.
Why?
And just so let's give people the
Yeah,
background on that real quick, and
yeah,
then you jump back to your point.
yeah.
It's a young man who graduated from Temple, was over near the Drexel campus, walking. The video is chilling, worse than something you'd see on television. Young man walks by him. I believe it's a young man. Turns, takes two more steps behind him, and puts two bullets in the back of that young man's head. And it and we're nowhere with that right now. There's video out there, things like that. That's the kind of thing that has to just. I mean, talking about it, makes the hair on the back of my neck go up.
It's got to give you chills, right? Because you,
Mm.
you sit there and say, people say, oh, well, maybe he's going to fight, right? He fought the robber or he did that. I mean, this is just a young man walking down the street and get executed, and so I sit there and say to folks, this is the why, right? This is why you go after guns. I can't, when you look at the data, the recidivism rate for someone with a gun is the highest. The federal government did a long series a report, is an extensive report that shows the recidivism of someone with a gun, and that by the time you get to that place, Dave, you're now moved into a different posture,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think, part of that is really so that just scares you, you know what I mean? Because at any week, all of us could be that individual. and when we look at how brazen these folks are, and the weaponry that they're using, and the amount of rounds that they're, I mean, you look at those guys who are shooting, they just throwing bullets all over the place, right? The
Yeah.
one, I think, he's shooting up in the air. I don't know where he's shooting, but
Yep.
it just kind of really makes it a difficult to understand, some of the things that we're seeing, and what we have to do differently
Yeah.
if we're going to change the trajectory of where we're going.
Yeah. And one of those guns, by the way, was an FN 5.7, I think they call it. That was shot at the Roxborough scene. Those bullets go right through a car, right through them. The other bullets bounce off. They get caught inside.
More bullet vest, right? No vest will stop that.
Yep. Nope.
It's a very lethal weapon, as you know,
Yeah.
and it's meant to be a lethal weapon, right? And
Okay.
so it's we have to, man. We really have to really, So that's why I'm not against anyone. I believe in that there are things that have to be changing in the system, because that's been my work. But I also think there has to be a balanced approach. I mean, there has to be a balance. We have to be more, a balance. And I think no one should be arguing about how we address guns in our space. I mean, because I can't project whether Kevin Bethel, whoever I am, I mean, is not going to take that gun and do harm to someone else. But what I can do is say, hey, if I get that person with that gun, that certainty of action with him or her can definitely impede them going on to do something that maybe they stop them from doing something they should never be doing. But but it's a process. And
yeah, let me ask you about something I heard in the last couple of days from several law enforcement people about this Rule 6105. If you're familiar with that, it has to do with teenagers adjudicated as a juvenile with gun charges, who then later get arrested as adults. And when prosecutors go to prosecute them as potentially as a career criminal because they've had multiple gun arrests as a juvenile, they can't do that because the legislature in one of the bills that passed over the past few years, or I don't even know how old the law is, will not allow you to use juvenile adjudications in gun cases to make somebody a career criminal when they become an adult and get caught using a gun again. Are you familiar with that? And if you are, what do you think about that?
Yeah, not familiar with that, Dave. But I do think that as we look at the process, and we have to be smart, right? We have to work smarter, right? And we have to look at. I mean, I think clearly. Listen, I get some of the understanding, right? You're trying to give juveniles a clean slate. There's enough studies to say kids will age out of their process. But if there's clear delineation that a young person who has a proclivity to carry a gun, has carried a gun multiple times, and now as an adult, I mean, just because I'm at 17 and I carried a gun, now I turned 18 and 19 and I'm still carrying a gun, then all of that in its totality has to be something that gives you consideration if you're trying to do what folks have said, right? Target those folks who are at high risk, right? That's what the argument. We're going to do all this other stuff and give everybody the opportunity to focus on the most high risk, most person who's going to be the most likely to harm or do harm in our communities. And then we get to face, and now we say, well, wait a minute, we're going to change the model, right? So you got to pick and choose. Where do you want to be? Do you want to focus on those high risk individuals who are a danger to our community, and that's a small percentage? Or do we want to continue to create these different layers and tiers that just dilute all of that, so you can't get to that place? So if a kid's continually carrying a gun, as a juvenile, and may have used that gun, then we at some point we have to make that distinction. That this is maybe something. So I don't think there's got to be an all or nothing, but you should be able to carve out. If a kid is conducting a sexual assaults as a child, does that matter whether when they turn 18, does that go away and they continue to sexually assault? I mean, I think we really have to think through what we do as the legislators. I think they have to get beyond just sometime the paper and really dissect what is the why? What are we trying to accomplish here? And sometimes you have to sit in the room and really, really have a strong conversation, because I think sometimes we're not spending enough time. We're just brushing across the issues and thinking, we're going to put something on a legislative slate and it's going to pass. Recognize that there's 67 counties in the state of Pennsylvania, and so you have to be more thoughtful and very more deliberate in how we go about crafting legislation. What are we trying to accomplish? And what are we trying? And I think when you do that, maybe you can come to a better results. But it seems like we don't seem to take that layer, that approach. And maybe we do, and maybe it's just not enough, or maybe the right people are not in the room. to
Right.
have a more stronger conversation about what that should look like.
Yeah. Kevin, you were strong on this a few years back in the school system, the diversion program, which is first-time offenders who get in a bit of a problem at school, those kind of things, meeting with their parents, meeting with the individual, meeting with school officials, to make sure a young kid, 13 or 12, 10 years old, doesn't get a criminal record, gets an opportunity to straighten their lives out. You talked about that before. And a lot of kids can get straightened out, and a lot of kids do get straightened out. Some of them get straightened out by playing football and playing sports and things like that. Is there anything in the school system now, or something in the school system you'd like to do, or like to see happen, that you think might be able to reach these kids a little earlier about the gun situation, or do you think just kind of what do you think needs to be done there? Do we need to get to them younger? Obviously, right?
Yeah, but I share with folks, when I coming, from the policing and moving now into the school district, what I told my colleagues sometimes, I think we look at the glass half full versus half empty. I've told them, I said, like, a lot of stuff that's going in the school district, Dave, is doing all of that, right? I mean, and, and when you look at, I tell them, when I look at the school district, like, as a kid who grew up in West Philadelphia, graduated from Bartram High School, high school saved my life.
Mm.
Right. It was that place where I got fellowship. I played baseball. My coach gave me money when I didn't have anything to eat, you know what I mean? And so I tell folks, the school district and the school is that place that's, they're doing conflict resolution. They're teaching kids how to manage in that space, right? Working with young kids around their anger. There's a lot of support from our support services team and crisis management, and all of that stuff is happening in that school community. And I know, the district has talked a lot about that. We have all the after school. We partner with the school district, partner with a plethora of community groups that are in our schools after school, in our schools during school. So it is this hub. And so sometimes I tell people, if you think about the number of, like, 9% of all of our violence is around juveniles.
Mm-hmm.
I often tell people we're actually doing pretty good. And I'm not saying, this perfect, but I think the district has done a really good job of really, working in that environment and trying to get kids to stay into the system, which is oftentimes the challenge, is they start to sometimes drop out as they get older.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, responding to those kids who've been victims, and we have a strong crisis response team for those. I think I don't know if there's any secret sauce, just really working with young people around conflict resolution, how to manage their anger, how to manage this space in a better way. But 120,000 kids come to our schools, and then there's another 80. I mean, we add in the charter schools, and we're over 200,000 in the private schools.
Mm-hmm.
What I want people to walk away with is 99% of our kids get up every day and do the right thing,
Right.
and do it the right way, and go on to be successful adults in our world. It's just a small percentage of our juveniles who because of whatever they dealt with, or whatever the issues they've dealt with, have to make that turn to the other side and become very, different in that space and be violent in that space. And so I think at the end of the day, we often have to look at the system and say, this is really doing well. There's a lot of community groups out there working with our young people. There's a lot of coaches out there, and families out there, and I think everybody is doing a lot of the work. We just have to kind of keep pressing. There is no brake pad. We just have to keep pushing and keep pushing, keep working with our young people, be a voice for them, let them share their thoughts. But I can't personally say there's any one particular thing, Dave, that's going to kind of be that silver lining. All this,
And listen, props off to some of the Eagles yesterday. Showed up at a rec center out in West Philadelphia. Miles Sanders, I think, and AJ Brown came to talk to the kids, football players, about violence and things like that.
And did you see them, Dave? Did you see those young people's response? And when people sit there and say you don't have power, I look at those guys. Did you see those young people? If they told those kids, don't do this, I think those kids would go home and say, he told me not to do this. And I think sometimes, they have to do more of that, right? Because I think sometimes they don't realize that they become these things for our young people.
Yes.
And if they use that power, because sometimes our voices are dead, right? I mean, we're not that popular, right?
Yes.
But popularity, oftentimes, I looked at the faces of those young people in that audience, and the way they jumped up, you would have thought, when they walked in that room, you could just, I'm looking at it on TV, you could see the energy.
Yeah.
And so I think they really well. First, we appreciate that they wore a Roxborough.
Yep.
Some of the guys wore a Roxborough uniform. That was really
Yep.
that was very positively received in the district. But going into the school was, I mean, what I saw the other day. I mean, if we can get more people out in that system, those guys who are out there who are influencers, who
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from who can sit there and use their voice, it definitely can have an impact on our young people. We did that when we did our flash mobs. I remember getting, I
Yeah.
think with DJ Diamond Cuts and other folks who would come
Yeah.
into that space and start trying to talk to the young people to settle them down, and they can be those influencers that we need.
Yeah. So I got a little suggestion. I saw LeBron James on TV last night wearing the number 6 black circle on his uniform for Bill Russell, who just passed away, the Celtic great, the center. It might be nice for some of the basketball players, football players, and baseball players in this city to find out what Nicholas's number was on the football team and maybe wear that patch on their jersey for Nicholas and for his family and for the kids. I mean, I heard a kid the other day who's friends with this kid who plays on a football team with him. And, I have 2 sons. Almost ripped my heart out of my chest. My sons are grown. My son was the victim of armed robbery in Philadelphia when he was a student up at Temple. 2 kids with guns, 15-year-olds, tried to take his backpack and his phone. Luckily, let it go. And those individuals were arrested and charged, those kind of things. But I was a coach for 20 years. These kids listen when you hit them at the right spot. And if it's an A.J. Brown or Miles Sanders or Jalen Hurts, whoever it is, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, whoever, if those guys can pitch in here too, and I know they are, I'm not saying they're not, maybe they can do a little bit more of that. That might help, might reach one kid.
I think, and I think when you describe your sons, and I think about, I don't have sons, I have daughters, but I've always told people, when I started doing my work, even around the diversion work, and I did a video with my daughter being arrested, just to walk her, because I wanted to show people what it looked like. She wasn't actually arrested. But one of the things I sat in that room, Dave, and I said, well, this is my child, right? This is my daughter, right? And if my daughter was getting arrested for this at the time we did a video with scissors, I would be furious. And so I think when you talk about the number, I think it should also represent, like, if this was your child, if you sent your child to school today and this was your child, how would you feel?
Right.
If you can take that anger and that frustration and bring it to life, that's what we're missing. Like, everybody sees these whether the kids, adults, or wherever, like it's somebody else's family member, it's somebody else's child. You know what I mean? A mother took her son to school that day and he didn't go home because he came out of a football game.
Yeah.
If that doesn't rile people and say that could be my child, then there's something wrong with us as a city. And that's why I get so frustrated. I'm saying, why can't we see that? If we see this as our problem and not somebody else's problem, then folks would get in line and do what they need to do to stop what we're doing. But until we do that, I mean, it's just going to be this constant,
Kev, you know me, I'm a boots on the ground guy. I can probably say that I've been to over 1,000 vigils for young people like this over my 35 years in Philadelphia and in the neighborhoods, to see the outpouring of sympathy and, the weeping and all that kind of thing when something like this happens. You can't walk away from that unmoved. I mean, I'd get back in the vehicle and think about my 2 sons or kids I coached, stuff like that. And I think you're right. That sense of urgency has to get translated into reaching out to these kids and saying, look, this could happen. Don't let it happen. Don't you be part of that problem. Stay away from that problem. And I think that's the gut punch.
Yeah, and these kids have parents. These kids are out there engaging in violence, have parents, right? They have some adults in their space, and some of them are contributing to this issue, right? And so, it's Dave. I mean, you're hitting it right on the head. I mean, it's
Kev, if you could talk to at least 4 of the individuals, there may be as many as 7 or 8, according to Captain Jason Smith yesterday, persons of interest in this Roxborough situation. If you could talk to those kids, if they happen to be listening, or their parents happen to be listening, or somebody in their family happens to be listening in the coming days when this podcast, gets out there, what would you say to them? I mean, this is a chance to do something here and not have the police chase you down, because that's what's going to happen here. You heard the commissioner say yesterday, we will track you down and you will be brought to justice. What would you say to them now?
Well, let me take my filter out, Dave. The first part I would like to say, I'll take that out, right? Because it's a PG-13 show. But I mean, I think I just would reemphasize what the commissioner and the police department said yesterday. You know, I think it was yesterday, right?
Yes.
You know, I mean, at this point, I mean, you should turn yourself in. I mean, because there's not, I mean, at this point, you're wanted for murder. You know, that is the highest offense in America, one of the highest offenses in America. You know what I mean? And I expect that with our federal partners and the police partners and everyone involved, there will be no stone unturned until those individuals are brought to justice. So you have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have a choice. I thought that the police department was being a little bit fair the other day, you know, of saying, hey, you can have the opportunity to turn yourself in, or we're going to come get you. And so, I mean, I think they have an opportunity to take advantage of that process to come in and turn themselves in, or face the wrath of what comes with that, and hope with the hopes that no one's injured in that process. I mean, and so you know, I just would just reemphasize what the commissioner said and the police department said the other day. Yeah, I mean that you have an opportunity to turn yourself in. They're giving them the opportunity to turn themselves in, and they should take full advantage of that.
Yeah. You and I have talked a lot about this in the past when you were a deputy commissioner, and we're talking about it forever of late with all the numbers of murders and things like that. Let's end this by kind of getting your experienced opinion here. We're at 410 murders already. We're at 1,700 shootings already this year. The numbers: 31 murders last month, aggravated assault 665, auto theft 987, shootings 267, shooting victims 165. Those are daunting numbers.
Yes, they are.
Yes, and I know a lot of people gravitate to Chuck Ramsey, Rich Ross, Kevin Bethel, individuals who have served at a high level before, and ask you, I'm sure, or say to you, what do you think needs to be done? Just Kevin Bethel's opinion on how do you slow this down? How do you bring this, not that one murder is a reasonable number, how do you bring this back to earth at this point?
I think that's a tough question, Dave. You know,
it is, no doubt about it. I've been
because
asked myself about it.
Because because part of I'm not on the inside, right? And I don't know some of the activity, you know, that actually is underway, but just from an outsider, you know, looking. Well, first and foremost, I often challenge folks as, you know, when I was the deputy commissioner and I ran the operation for Commissioner Ross, Commissioner Ramsey at the time, you know, I looked at these as you know, not just episodes of like 1 year we had 500 or 300, you know, and you know, like some people seem like we're running out the clock now, right? We run to the end of the year and December 31st, and I shared this with someone else, and then the clock starts over again.
Right.
You know, one of the things that we did during our tenure when we got the numbers down to the lowest is that we were all working together. You know what I mean? It was not this, you know, at times there was tension. There was tension. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there wasn't. I mean, but we all were singly focused on, you know, that time. You know, the mayor and Nutter had made this charge that he wanted to reduce homicides and shootings by XY percentage, and we would, and Commissioner Ramsey would give us this task to do that. But one thing I always knew that, you know, collectively, whether it been our, you know, state legislators, whether it was our city council folks, whether it be the DA, it was the federal partners, it was all of us. We were all leaning forward with purpose. And the purpose was to keep our community safe. There was no conversation about defunding police. I mean, if you remember, Dave, you were there. I felt for the first time we had gotten that synergy together, right? We were doing in the community. We're doing our police service areas. We had gone through you know, the collaborative reform with the federal government and reduced our police shootings down. We were doing, like, we weren't some backwater across the country.
And the numbers reflected that, Kev. The numbers reflected that. Yes.
And people stood by us, right? People were standing there. I remember all those people stood behind us. It was you know, I mean, it was the same people who would turn on policing later on after the George Floyd incident. I said, well, wait a minute. We were moving in that direction. We were moving in the positive direction. And so I feel like, you know, part of that is we kind of had we've gone through this process now. We don't want the police, but we sit there and we realize that, guess what? They're a very critical part of the work that we do, not just in violence, but in everything we do, from responding to auto accidents, to domestics, to robberies, to everything else. Or even, hey, guess what? I want them around my schools now. It was only 2 years ago we were saying, keep them out. You know what I mean? And so I think, you know what I mean? So now we've had this, I don't know, I mean, we're seeing all these people getting killed. I mean, is this a test? Is this some kind of experiment?
Yeah.
Like, no, right? We should be sitting, I mean, and getting back to where we were before, where it was a collective supporting, and it's a three-pronged approach: prevention, intervention, and enforcement. And you can do that with the swiftness and certainty and the severity you can talk about, right? We know enough
Yes.
data to say, I mean, I don't want to, you ain't got to go away for 10 years. I'm not saying that. You can tailor that process, but we when we worked in that process, when we were all in there together, and when we were leading together, when we all had a core responsibility, we all had purpose. I think that's where we have to get back to.
Hmm.
And it can't be just about, kind of meeting in these rooms or meeting after these, these press conferences. Is really getting in there and
Hmm.
doing the hard work
Yeah.
and
Well,
letting the data and letting all that stuff drive your success.
yes. And I have to say this, I'm glad to see the police department has really kicked it into super high gear here. And I'd like to see all these individuals responsible for this with good evidence to back it up, video, forensic evidence, witnesses, to make this a really strong and solid case to make sure justice is done for Nicholas's family, all the other players who were injured, the players who were terrified, the parents who were terrified, the people in that neighborhood who were terrified. But before I go, let me say this, Kevin. You and I have known each other for a long time. You're a gentleman with a big heart and really great experience. I remember days doing narcotics raids with you when you were in the Narcotics Bureau.
Well,
And
don't bring back those
early
days.
morning, 6 o'clock, not
Yeah,
even had
yeah.
a coffee yet, and out
Yes,
there
sir.
banging on
Yes,
doors
sir.
with you. And
Yes,
and
sir.
I highly respect what you do, how you do it, and kind of the message you bring when you bring it. And that's why I kind of felt that it was important. And I've been on you for about a month now to come on the
No,
show
no,
and do this. And I greatly appreciate you carving out some time for us today. And you offered a lot of good advice here today and a lot of good sentiments. And I do agree with you that we need to get back to the things that were working and make them
yes,
work
sir.
again. So, listen, I want to thank you for being on the show today, Kevin.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I want to have you back when we can talk about some more positive things if we can. And again,
Sounds good, Dave.
thanks again for all your experience, all your years in service. I greatly appreciate that. And speak for others who wouldn't mind seeing you back in service again.
Here we go. Here we go.
Couple people heard that you were coming on
Here
the
we go,
show and,
Dave.
and
Here we
said that. So
go.
I'll pass that along to
Here
you
we
just as a
go.
kind of
All
little
right.
feather in your cap.
I appreciate that, Dave.
And I do
Very humbling.
appreciate
I
you,
appreciate
Kevin.
it.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. Folks, that's it for Philly Prime this week. Thanks for listening. Great conversation with Kevin Bethel. He has ideas and things like that. We'll talk about them again. Thanks again. Thanks for listening.